Thanks for joining us, Combat Fanatics. You are listening to Brawls and Beers with Robin Black and my good friend Steffi D. Crooklyn. And today we will be enjoying a beer and watching one of the greatest fights of all time. And we'll be breaking this thing down. Nick Diaz versus Takanori Gomi. This is an epic, epic fight, and it is from Pride 33 Second Coming. If you want to take a few minutes and watch the fight, go to Fight Pass right now. In the top right corner, you'll see a little search bar, and just put in Nick Diaz versus Takanori Gomi. And enjoy it. We're going to pause for 5 seconds. You can pause us, watch the fight, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. If you just watched this fight, you're all lit up and your mind is going crazy. It's one of the greatest fights you've ever seen, bar none. If you didn't just watch the fight, that's okay. I think you know about this fight, and we hope you're going to enjoy Steffi and I breaking this thing down. I want to introduce my co-host, one of the original pioneers in reporting in this sport, one of the greats in the business, Steffi D. Crooklyn.
Oh, I don't know about the greats. The infamous maybe, but not the greats. Let's start this off a little different this week, because we call this podcast Brawls and Beer, and we totally forgot about the beer last week. I think it was because
drank it. I didn't forget about it.
Robin was 2 or 3 beers deep by the time we did our podcast, and we forgot all about the beers by then. But this week, we're going to tell people about your beer. So, Robin, what kind of beer are we drinking tonight?
Well, nothing goes with a great fight. Nothing pairs with a great fight better than a great beer. And if we're going to do Brawls and Beers, each week we're going to look at a great fight, and we're going to pair it with a beer. And today, in tribute to Gomi, I'm having a Sapporo. It's not the most complex of Japanese beers. It's easily available, so everybody can enjoy one. Easy drinking, comes in a nice silver can. And when it's ice cold, it is tasty. And it really goes well with this fight, because this fight is quick, it's exciting, and it's very tasty.
So if you were going to pour out one for your homie Gomi, you'd be pouring out a little Sapporo.
Yeah, a little Sapporo. I mean, Japan has some incredible beers, and I'm sure if we keep doing this podcast, we're going to explore many more of those. But Sapporo, nice place to start.
Okay, and if you were to rank this beer, is it in your top 5?
I don't know if it's in my top 5, but as far as like international premium beers, you can get it anywhere. When you do get it in a bar, the tap comes with a samurai sword as a tap, and that boosts it up to top 10 or 15.
Awesome. All right, so let's get back into here with the fight talk. Let's get down to brass tacks with this Diaz and Gomi fight, which, if any fight could ever be titled epic, this would be the one. So, first off, I want to get your thoughts on the fight and compare it this time that you watched it. You went in with a clinical eye. You're breaking it down for an analysis. Compare this time watching it to the very first time you ever saw it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I first saw it in 2007, and it blew my mind. I was in my late 30s, and I was starting to train to want to fight, as crazy and stupid of an idea as that was for an old man with not many skills. And when I remember watching this fight, I remember thinking, oh, man, if I was ever in a fight like that, I'm dead. Normal humans can't fight that way. Normal humans can't perform that way. And now when I watch it, 7 years later, you still kind of, that's what's so beautiful about it is, when fighters, even elite fighters, which I am the farthest thing from, when elite fighters watch fights like that, they realize it's special. Forrest Griffin retired when he saw Vanderlei and Brian Stann fight because he knew he wasn't capable of that. And fights like this, when you see like the desire and the unwillingness to break, and Gomi had to physically have his body almost shut down to stop. Both men wanted it so desperately, and the technique was amazing. The way that it unfolded was amazing. The story the many stories within the fight were amazing, but it was the desire of two men to win at all costs. And in particular, Diaz who had desperately always been a lover of Pride. You know, Pride never die, man. Like, he loved that organization, still does to this day. And he showed up in Las Vegas to, as Pride came to America, to win that fight at all costs. And that's what he did.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you know, there were a whole slew of factors that made that fight special. You know, tick off a few of those that you feel made it so special.
Man, there were so many things about this fight and about the whole event that were just remarkable, were memorable, were special. And it started really with the whole event. You know, people loved Pride. Pride never died. They loved it. And Pride was in Nevada, in Las Vegas. And right from the beginning, the Nevada State Athletic Commission said that they couldn't use the 10-minute round. They couldn't use foot stomps. They couldn't use soccer kicks. And my pal John Ramdeen was down there. And he said when they introduced the commission, the audience booed the commission because they were offended. This is what they loved about Pride. Yet all the fighters just rose to the occasion. You know, when you have Dan Henderson knocking out Vanderlei Silva as your main event, you have Shogun wrecking Alistair Overeem. You know, you have Hayato Sakurai and Mac Danzig. Everybody loved that fight. And Sokaju finishes off Little Nog in 23 seconds of the first round. Little Nog was a minus 1,400 favorite. You know, so you have a night like that. And yet with all of that going on in the night, this fight, Nick Diaz versus Gomi, is the fight. And, you know, the back and forth, the desire that these men fought with, the fact that you had two proud men, both so excited to face each other with a ton of respect for each other in advance. You had Diaz's need to perform in Pride, his love of Pride, and his desire to be the greatest. And you have this crazy back and forth fight that has everything in it, technical, everything in it, heart-wise, everything, heart and desire and will and, you know, human greatness. All of that is in it. Then you have that insane finish with the go-go plata where Gomi is finished and he's unconscious. You have the debacle after where it is turned into a no contest because Diaz had a bunch of weed in his system, which is stupid. Obviously, it's really stupid. It didn't help him win the fight. But it has become a part of the definition who Nick Diaz is. Fans love about him, part of his identity, and this fight is a part of his identity, and even the no contest is a part of his identity. And then you have that giant gaping curtain of flesh dangling from his skull at the end of the fight as he's celebrating that is just swinging at you, and it's like winking at you like a giant eye. It looks like a samurai sword cut chunks of his face off. All of that. It had everything in only a round and a half. It's one of the greatest fights of all time.
Sure was. Sure was. Did you have any particular thoughts on their striking?
Well, their striking was realistically, like I was saying, that what I found the most interesting about it is in retrospect. At the time, it was like, wow, Nick Diaz's hands are looking good. But Nick Diaz's hands were looking like Nick Diaz does now. Two southpaws, two guys right hand forward. Gomi's always had a vicious right hook. I don't know it for a fact, but I suspect that Gomi is a right-handed fighter that fights southpaw possibly because that's how he started training or that's how he started wrestling, whereas Diaz is a real lefty. So Gomi's right hand was the vicious fear-monger big smash weapon, and when he hit Diaz with it, he dropped him. So that fascinating combination of seeing Diaz's foreshadowing of what would become sort of part of his defining factor of Nick Diaz, of the giant amount of volume, and Nate Diaz, the giant amount of volume. Also in round two, when Diaz recognized that Gomi was tired, you really saw he's not thought of as much of a game planner or a strategist, but you saw that he understood about managing distance. If he could keep Gomi on the end of that right pawing right hand and the power left, he would win the fight. And he really did that for most of the second round before Gomi shot the takedown. So realistically, Diaz appeared at first glance like a scrapper who made it work, other than when he got caught with the right hooks. But in retrospect, it looked like a developing fighter. So, you know, if you watch it as somebody who just likes seeing scraps, you saw two guys go crazy. And if you watch it as somebody who loves the beauty of technique, you saw the beginnings of some of the definitive techniques of Nick Diaz.
How radically do you think Diaz's style has changed from then to now, especially that he doesn't have to cut so much weight?
Yeah, it's interesting to see Nick Diaz. He weighed in at, I believe, 160 for that fight. And Gomi has, fought much, much lower than that. And so, there were different sized men with the American doing more weight cutting. Diaz, he's not a small guy. He's going to fight Anderson Silva at 185 pounds. And I'm sure by fight time, he'll be 195. Anderson Silva, I'm sure, will be, 210. But what I found most interesting about Diaz was he had a real old school badass mentality in that fight. In the striking, yes, we saw it developing, but you saw him willing to tuck his chin and throw in combination, and he thought way more about offense than he did about defense, which is why he got clocked with the counter rights. But it was the ground game, too. There was such an old school aspect to it. It's like, hey, man, I'm in guard. I'm going to take some punches to be able to get an armbar or a sweep. Nobody fights like that anymore. Nick Diaz doesn't fight like that anymore. Nobody does. Now it's, I'm in guard. My job is to tie you up and prevent you from doing damage, or get underhooks, get my head under your chin, or hip heist myself out and get back to my feet. Nobody fights as a guard player. Nick Diaz was fighting as a guard player that night. It's another element that made it so beautiful. It made it so exciting. But it's also another element that makes going back and watching these old fights so cool, because that was something you'll never see today. You'll just never see a high-level guy, unless he's a specialist, be that level of guard player. But there was another one of those foreshadowing things that I thought was interesting. Later in round one, Diaz starts playing turtle guard a little bit, where he turtles up, and he's doing it in hopes of locking up that Kimura he loves, or just defending and getting back to his feet and getting an underhook. And it's interesting to see that in 2007, because we saw him play that a ton against George St. Pierre, a ton. And he actually frustrated and worried George with it a little bit and kind of confused him. George still won those rounds, but Diaz played that turtle guard, and it was semi-familiar to George. So looking back now, knowing how well he played that turtle against George, this fight becomes all the more interesting.
So would you recommend this fight to a brand new MMA, not quite fan, a new MMA watcher? Would you recommend this fight to them to get them hooked?
If you don't like this fight, if you don't like Nick Diaz versus Takanori Gomi, then you will never like fighting. So I think this is a nice litmus test. Like, it's like if you know somebody who might enjoy combat sports, show them this fight. They're going to have one of two reactions. Oh my God, that's amazing. How do those human beings do that? That was the most dramatic thing I've ever seen. Or they'll be like, ew, gross. There's like blood and stuff. And that guy punched that guy. And in which case it's like, hey, cool, we know, right? I think this is the perfect fight for someone like that. It's easy to understand. On the surface, you can tell when Gomi hits Diaz, he falls down. It's like, oh my God, he's getting him. Then when Diaz is hitting Gomi a lot of times, you can tell he's winning. If you want to analyze it deeper, you see the ebb and the flow of their confidence. You see the movement of, where their mentality is at. You see all these little technical moments in which, although one guy appears to be having a great moment, the other guy is coming around. You see the way that the sway of their energy levels, that imaginary power of Gomi dropping over time as Diaz feels that and he's swelling. You can see all of these things, but for the noob, they're like, he hit him, he fell down. It's dramatic. I think anybody can get this fight. If you love fighting, if you love the minutia of fighting, there's a lot here for you. If you just enjoy seeing action, there's a lot here for you. This is the fight.
Okay. Do you feel that this fight is the one that made Diaz a fan favorite, or could it have been already in the past with Robbie Lawler or Joe Riggs, or a combination of his attitude? I mean, if you were to choose a fight that maybe contributed to it, would this be the one?
Wow, no, I mean, yes, all of those things. Nick Diaz is very special. Nick Diaz is incredibly special as an athlete. He's incredibly special as a martial artist, as a combat sportsman, and he's incredibly special as a human being thrust into the limelight. the things he says, the fact that he has literally no filter whatsoever. I mean, all of those things make him hugely, dramatically special. Each of those fights, Lawler, the Lawler knockout, Riggs and Riggs in the hospital, this insane fight. Go through to Paul Daly. That round with Paul Daly is almost this fight again in some ways, at least as far as its drama and its back and forth desperation. I mean, this is who Nick Diaz is. Each of these pieces, if you are sort of new to Nick Diaz and you've seen him do some interviews and you've seen his highlight reels and you've seen him clown on guys in the middle of throwing 37 punches and you like him, go back and watch these fights. Watch, the history of this man making his way through this world of combat. And all of those ingredients is what makes this guy special. I mean, I think it depends on who you are. For me, these men are many books. They're many movies. They're many chapters of books. And, it's all of the ingredients that make them who they are. And if you know all of that, if you're a historian and if you're a lover of fights and if you're a technique nerd and if you're all of those things, every ingredient is part of it. I mean, each one of these fights and each one of these moments has added someone else or, a giant grouping of people to the Nick Diaz fan club, army, tribe, whatever you want to call it.
All right. And my final question is, how do you think Nick is going to fare against Anderson Silva?
That's a really good question for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of people assume that Anderson Silva is a better striker. Anderson Silva will be working on ways to make Nick Diaz miss and hurt him for it. He's been very good at that his whole career. He's bigger. He probably hits harder in one shots. But, I mean, you watch this fight. Watch the Paul Daly fight. I mean, if you bet against Nick Diaz, you're a crazy person. You're completely insane. His desperation to win, his will to win is like very few humans that walk the earth. So I would not bet against Nick Diaz. I think also, Nick Diaz, for all his oddness, is mentally incredibly strong when it comes down to the moments of a fight. And I think that could be the difference. Anderson Silva comes back from a lifetime of greatness, goes through 2 fights of, imagine it. Your whole life has just been one long highlight reel of brilliance, and now it ends up with you clowning around and being embarrassed as you're knocked unconscious, and then getting your leg broken and screaming at the top of your lungs. A year plus of rehab with all of your family telling you not to do it. Everybody saying don't do it, and you go standing in there, and if for one moment you're thinking, what the hell am I doing here? You're in a lot of trouble. He may not do that. He may say, I'm here because I'm the greatest of all time. And if he does, he'll win that fight. But mindset is going to play a great deal in how this fight goes. And at the top level, it really almost always does. All right, I think this beer is now a dead soldier. So, Crooklyn, I think we're running out of time.
I think we are. It was a great breakdown this week. What do we have on tap for next week?
Ooh, baby, next week we got to look at Jose Aldo versus Mendez 2. Chad Mendez versus Jose Aldo. The first one, it ended a little quickly, but Mendez is a very different fighter now, and I think we have to look at that one. So this has been Brawls and Beers, and it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Steffi Daniels, and thank you, Bloody Elbow, and thank you guys for listening.